Hiya, welcome to Darren in the studio. Thanks for swinging around for another video. It's not been that long, has it, since we were together? And I was talking about my July buys and pickups and stuff like that. This video, if you've seen the title, you'll know what it's all about. This video is a video that I've wanted to do for a while. But I sort of realized that 2024 was a very special year when it comes to the history of this particular artist. 2024 marks the 60th anniversary of the passing of one of not just country music, but one of the world's greatest voices, one of the greatest singers of all time, really. And it's unusual to find somebody who was so unique at that time and has continued to have popularity 60 years after he passed away. We're talking about the gentleman of country music. Of course, we're talking about Jim Reeves. Now, Jim Reeves is a very, very important part of my musical journey. Lots and lots of people talk about their musical journeys on YouTube and especially on these kind of channels. But Jim was the very first voice that I ever really heard, that I ever really took notice of when I was a child. And I would probably be around 3 or 4 years old when I first heard his voice. And I would have heard his voice at my grandma's house. And she liked her records. Also, my auntie and uncle, my auntie Nellie and Uncle Albert. My Uncle Albert loved his records as well, and he had a few records, and he was a Jim Reeves fan as well. Now, people of my age, their grandmas, our grandmas, all liked Jim Reeves. And if you go into charity shops these days, you'll find lots and lots of Jim Reeves records. And there's a reason for that, because all those people in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s were all buying Jim Reeves records. He was very, very popular, even long after he'd passed away in 1964. And of course, you will find lots and lots of these records in charity shops. And like I say, he sold millions and millions of albums worldwide, and his popularity is still as strong today as it was when he died, possibly more so now than he ever was, because when Jim died, he was just starting to get worldwide stardom. He was popular in his own country, he was popular in Europe, and he was popular in South Africa, but he was nowhere near being a massive star. But upon his death and the years that followed, he would prove to be a really important part of musical history, and his legacy has continued to this very day. And even today, they're still putting out Jim Reeves albums. They're still making his albums. They're still doing compilations. And they're even still putting out new albums with brand new backing tracks over his voice. And we'll find out a little bit more about that a little bit later on. So, this is my tribute to one of my musical heroes. Certainly the first musical hero I ever had, and somebody that even today I still love to listen to. And that's it, really. There's nothing about it being a secret love, or it's nothing to do with that. And I'm never ever embarrassed about the fact that I love Jim Reeves. The fact of the matter is, he was just a superb singer who I just love hearing singing. There's no guilty pleasures or anything like that. I don't feel guilty about it at all. In fact, I feel enriched. The fact that I've been able to enjoy all these songs and albums over the years, and still today I regularly listen to his superb voice. So what I've done is I've gone through my collection, and I have a vast collection of Jim Reeves, mainly LP records, but I've got a sort of few CDs in the collection as well. I've chosen one CD. We've also got a DVD in here, but on the main, they're LPs that we're going to look at. And what I've done is I've chosen a selection of albums in my collection which kind of pinpoint certain parts of Jim's career, both within his life and after he'd passed as well. Now, Jim Reeves was killed in a plane crash on the 31st of July 1964. He was the pilot. He'd not long finished his lessons, and he had a passenger. The passenger in the plane that crashed was his piano player, Dean Manuels, and Dean was also killed in the crash. And not only did that take the life of two excellent musicians, but it also robbed the world of one of the greatest voices of all time. But because Jim Reeves was a prolific demo recorder, he had a studio in his home, in his basement, and he would write and get songs from other people, and he would do demos, and he made hundreds and hundreds of demos. And thankfully, his wife, Mary Reeves, she kept all those tapes, and along with RCA Records, over the next few years and well into the 80s, they were putting out new material all the time. And some people didn't even realize that Jim Reeves had been killed in a plane crash. You know, well into the 70s, people used to think that he was still around because new music was coming out all the time. The wonders of technology, even back then in the mid 60s, was at the stage where you could put a whole new band at the back of just a voice. And because Jim Reeves was also a perfectionist when it came to recording, he would isolate his voice both at the RCA studios and at home. So they were able to take off the old backing tracks of his home recordings and his RCA recordings and put a whole new band on. And that's what they're still doing today with new material. So let's get started as to the things that I've got for you here. I'm going to start with this particular album. This is the first album I ever heard of Jim Reeves. This would be about 1970. This is an album called Bimbo. This is the CD version of it. And the reason I'm selected this CD version is because this shows you, this came out in 2011. This shows you that they're still making his CDs today. This was a collection put out on the RCA label originally. This was a collection of some of his early material on the Abbott label, which he was originally signed to. There was an album called Bimbo back in the day, but it had a lot more tracks on it. I think it had about 15 tracks on it. This is a 10-track album. This album runs for about 25 minutes. It's very, very short. Bimbo, Echo Bonita, Penny Candy, Mexican Joe, a lot of early classic Jim Reeves is on here. And of course, the track Bimbo itself was the song that first got me into Jim Reeves. When I was a kid, I was absolutely fascinated with that record. It was so catchy and fun. And because I was a small boy at the time, maybe I sort of related a little bit to this young boy called Bimbo within this song. And this album was originally owned. I do have a vinyl copy of this, and the vinyl copy was a copy that my grandma used to own, and now I have it. And every time I hear this album, whether it be on vinyl or CD, I always remember her and the wonderful sort of sounds that used to come from her record player, and of course my auntie and uncle as well, who also liked a bit of Jim Reeves. So this is the first album I ever heard of Jim Reeves. Like I said, this is a 2011 Hallmark reissue of it, just giving you an idea of the fact that they're still making this guy's music. He's still as popular today as he ever was. If you go into your local record store, I mean, here in the UK, we sort of have HMV. If I was to go into HMV tomorrow and head for the country music section, there is a Jim Reeves section, and there's a lot of CDs in there. Now, they're not making these CDs just for a laugh. They're making him because he's still very popular. This is the earliest thing I have, which is an original of Jim Reeves. It's not in its original cover. This is an old London record on the London label, and it's Mother Went a Walking on one side, and the other side is Padre of Old San Antone. Now these were part of the Abbott recordings. You can see here it says on it Abbott, part of the Abbott. It says on it an Abbott recording. He was signed to Abbott in America, and his records in the mid 50s and late 50s were issued on the London label here in the UK. This is a nice little original 78 record. I don't play my 78s, to be fair, because I haven't got the correct size stylus, and I don't want to spoil them. So that's the earliest thing that I've got of Jim Reeves. Next thing, celebrating the wonderful voice of Jim Reeves. This is the last album that Jim Reeves recorded within his lifetime. This is 1964. This is a nice little original RCA press of an album. Got to get the light out of the way. This is called Moonlight and Roses. This features a lot of Jim Reeves classics. A lot of singles came off this album. Moonlight and Roses, Mexicali Rose, Carolina Moon, which is a beautiful record. Roses, One Dozen Roses, Moon River is on here as well. Great little album. I have about 4 copies of this. This is an original mono press of it. I also have a stereo press of it, and also a later version of it. This is an original 1964 press of Jim's final album within his lifetime, Moonlight and Roses. The first album to be released by RCA Records, which featured Jim Reeves after he died. There were a couple of compilations that came out between 1964 and 1965, would be this one. This is 1965. This is the Jim Reeves Way. This is a nice little, also original mono pressing on the RCA label. The Jim Reeves Way. Make the World Go Away was a hit. It Hurts So Much was also a big hit. I Can't Stop Loving You. Somewhere Along the Line. A lot of good records, a lot of good songs on this album. Again, like I say, this is an original 1965 press of the first album released after he died. This jacket that he's wearing here is actually now in the Country Music Museum in Nashville, Tennessee, and it's something that I've had the pleasure of being right up close to. First album after he sadly passed away, July the 31st, 1964. This is 1965. Next, Jim Reeves, as I said earlier on, was absolutely massive, huge in South Africa. They absolutely loved him in South Africa, and they still do today. And in South Africa, of course, the 78 record, the 78 shellac record, had sort of been discontinued, certainly by the early 70s, but right into the 80s, RCA Records was still printing, still producing 78 records for certain parts of South Africa, because that's what they wanted his music on, and that's what they were still playing. This is a nice little South African album. I don't know how to pronounce this. You Are My Darling is the English pronunciation. Jy is my liefling. I think that's how you pronounce it. This is completely sung in South Afrikaans. And it's an unusual record, but his phrasing and the way he puts across the language is just brilliant. It's a very unusual thing for an artist to do, to sing outside of their native tongue, if you like. So completely sung in South Afrikaans. This is a South African version of You Are My Darling. I think this was only released in South Africa. This is a terrible copy. This is absolutely beaten to death. It really is. But it's on an original RCA label, made in South African, sang in South Afrikaans. You Are My Darling. Not sure what year this came out. This is probably during his lifetime. This would probably be about 62, 63-ish. Okay, next up, talking of South Africa, like I say, he was absolutely massive in South Africa. They loved him, and they still do today. And he was offered to make a movie. And he took the chance, and he made this. This is Kimberly Jim. This is the DVD release. I think this is on the Bear. Yeah, this is on the Bear Family Records label. I'm not sure when it actually came out. 2004 this came out, but this movie, can't get the light out of the way. This movie was first released in 1964, shortly before, just a few months before Jim died in the plane crash, and it never really got a proper airing. It was sort of ignored at the time, and today it's a bit of a cult classic. This is a nice little presentation of it with a nice little booklet. Kimberly Jim, starring Jim Reeves, also starring who else is in this? Jim Reeves, Madeleine Usher, Clive Parnell. Written for Jim Reeves, the music of Jim Reeves is featured, and it was filmed in South Africa as well. Kimberly Jim. Talking of Kimberly Jim, here's the soundtrack album, which was released alongside of Kimberly Jim. This features music from the movie and also stuff which wasn't featured in the film as well. This is a nice little original mono press. Is this mono or stereo? No, this is stereo. This is a stereo, nice little stereo original from '64 on the RCA label. Nice shot of Jim there on the back. He actually underwent acting lessons for the film, and if you get a chance to see it, then do so, because it's not a bad film. It probably needs remastering and sort of bringing up to date a little bit, and it's probably some of the cut, it needs editing, to be fair, because some of the cuts are a little bit strange in it. 1966, RCA Records, along with the help of his widow Mary Reeves, came up with this album. Now I've chosen this album because it's significant within his career, because he basically talks about his entire life in this, because he was interviewed numerous times, and they came up with some tapes which featured Jim talking about his life, and this is the result. This is Yours Sincerely, Jim Reeves. This is the South African version, sort of following on from the Kimberly Jim movie. This is the South African version of Yours Sincerely, 1966. This is an original South African RCA copy. The difference is that a lot of these titles aren't actually featured on the European and American version, and there's some recordings on this which aren't featured on the standard version as well. Jim talks about South Africa and how the people of South Africa are treated on this particular version, but that recording, those recordings aren't featured on the American and European version. So if you get a chance to pick up this version, it's slightly different, has a different soundtrack, different recordings on it. In the main it's the same, but towards the end of side 2 you get some different recordings of Jim speaking. He basically tells you about his life in this album, and some of this album was used for the Channel 4 documentary, which was made in about 94, 95, something like that, about his life, and which you can also pick up on DVD as well. Jim Reeves, Yours Sincerely, nice little South African pressing. Now, of course, when Jim died in '64, like I said earlier on, a lot of his music was still being released. Well into the 70s he was having hits. Well into the 80s he was having albums put out. This is 1981. Now, back in 1981, the early 80s, Owen Bradley, who was the original producer of Patsy Cline, got together with a few people and took Patsy's voice and isolated it, because also Patsy had passed away in a plane crash also a year before Jim died in '64. And Owen Bradley got the voices of Jim Reeves and Patsy Cline together, stripped off their backing tracks and put a whole new backing track on. And they came up with a brand new song. That song was called Have You Ever Been Lonely? Have You Ever Been Blue? Both Jim Reeves and Patsy Cline had recorded these songs, obviously, during their lifetimes. And like I say, Owen Bradley was able to strip away both versions, put the two voices together and produce that particular track. And it's featured here on this album, which is called Greatest Hits, Jim Reeves and Patsy Cline, which basically is what it says. And it just features the brand new mix of Have You Ever Been Lonely? Have You Ever Been Blue? A example of how Jim's career carried on well after his death. And this is the second attempt that they did at marrying Patsy Cline and Jim Reeves together. This is called Remembering Patsy Cline and Jim Reeves. This is a nice little American copy on the MCA label. This one is also on the MCA label. The track on here is I Fall to Pieces, duet with Patsy Cline and Jim Reeves. And again, the same technology was used. They took off the original backing track of both Jim and Patsy's tracks, married them together, put a whole new band on, and essentially you had a whole new track. And it got quite a lot of airplay in the States on sort of commercial country music radio, and brought Jim Reeves right back into the spotlight all over again. And basically what you have on here is a track by Patsy and then Jim and then Patsy and Jim and so on. Nice little album. This is 1982, MCA Records, Remembering Patsy Cline and Jim Reeves. This is it's an interesting little box set. If you're a regular to my channel, you will have seen this before. I've not had this very long, but I had to have it. I saw it on eBay and it was cheap as chips. This is called Limited Edition 6 Cassettes Jim Reeves. And that's exactly what it is. It's basically, if you haven't seen my other video, some of his albums on tape, presented in this beautiful box. There's no booklet or anything like that, but each cassette is in brand new condition. I'm guessing this is 80s. I'm guessing this came out around about the 80s. There's a catalogue number. There's a catalogue number there and a barcode, which gives you an idea that it's probably late 80s, to be fair. I should really look this up, see when this came out. I'm guessing late 80s, early 90s. Jim Reeves, 6 of his cassette albums in one nice little package. Next, another box set, which really sort of was a massive overview of his early work. This is called Gentleman Jim. These are CDs. I don't know how many CDs are in here. I think there's 4. Might be 4. There is 4. Comes with a nice little booklet. 1955 to 1959. These would have been the early recordings that he did, probably both with Abbott and the early years of RCA. This covers sort of like the Bimbo and all that kind of stuff, and you get extra takes on here, you know, sort of like second takes, third takes, outtakes, that sort of thing. Pick this up relatively cheap on eBay as well. A lot of Jim Reeves things, like I said before, you can pick up for next to nothing, both down your charity shop and online. Jim Reeves, Gentleman Jim, the Bear Family Collection from 1955-1959. Now we're coming more or less up to date. More or less up to date. I said earlier about them still making Jim Reeves records, and like I said earlier, you know, they're still putting out new material, if you like, and it's not that long ago that they found a new track that they put out as a single, and his music is still being listened to today, still being bought today. I said earlier on, get down to your local record shop and you will find brand new stuff, brand new material, not necessarily material, but brand new product of Jim Reeves. This came out in 2017. This is a double album. This is on the Sound Factory label, Vinyl Passion. This is called Jim Reeves, Am I Losing You? The Greatest Hits. Nice little double album. Nice little write-up of Jim. Nice little picture of Jim there. Also gives you the year of all the songs inside and their chart positions and stuff like that, both in the US and in the UK. 2017, like I say, they're still putting this stuff out. I have some other new Jim Reeves collections, but I thought I'd show you this one because this is a really nicely presented LP. Jim Reeves Greatest Hits, Am I Losing You? Finally, I'm going to show you the book that was put out by Jim Reeves, not by Jim Reeves, but of Jim Reeves. There have been a few sort of biographies of Jim's done over the years, but this is the most comprehensive one, and this is the one that kind of everybody was waiting for. This came out in 2011. It's by an author called Larry Jordan. Now, Larry Jordan is a bit of a Jim Reeves aficionado, if you like. He used to visit Mary Reeves before she passed away, and they had a really good friendship. She would tell him stories and things like that. And he came to write this book. This is the Untold Story, Jim Reeves. It's a pretty big book. It's a real comprehensive look at his life, his death, and his career after he passed away. You can pick this up. This is on the page turner. I was going to say label there. I suppose it is a label. The Untold Story. The life and times of country music's greatest singer. I would agree with that. Larry Jordan. Check this out if you can get a copy of this. The Untold Story, Jim Reeves. That's it. That's my homage to one of my favourite singers. Here I am with a Kiss t-shirt on, talking about Jim Reeves, and that's pretty much, that kind of sums me up a little bit. I've never been someone who just likes one kind of music. I was introduced to Jim Reeves when I was young, and then a few years later I was introduced to Kiss. So in my world, in my realm, they're very much connected. Like I say, Jim Reeves passing away July 31st, 1964, which is going to be, as I record this, which is going to be tomorrow. So I'm going to upload this a day before his anniversary so you can all see it. Next time you're down your charity shops, next time you're down your second-hand shops, or maybe you're in a record shop and you can see some new stuff, if you see some Jim Reeves, pick it up. Don't be shy to pick it up, because Jim Reeves was, as far as I'm concerned, and a lot of other people, he was and still is one of the greatest singers of all time. Pick up those albums in those shops, give them a good home, and I'm sure you won't regret it. So, thanks for watching. Leave your views and your comments. Love to hear your stories of Jim Reeves, what you like. Leave your views and comments. Make sure that you like the video. That really helps the channel. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. You know the deal by now. And hopefully we'll see you soon for another video right here in the studio. Ta-da.